It's loading.
Yes, it is.
So are we ready to begin?
Yes, go ahead.
All yours, Michael.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Cabetta, and I'm Policy Counsel for the ACLU, and I'm honored to welcome you to this event, analyzing and describing this report, the Wabanaki Studies Law, 21 years after implementation. This report was co-authored by the Abbey Museum, the ACLU of Maine, the Wabanaki Alliance, and the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission. The report analyzes a law that was sponsored by the Honorable Donald Loring, who joins us today and will deliver a keynote address shortly. 2 decades ago, the Honorable Donald Loring sponsored the Wabanaki Studies Law in the Maine state legislature. The law has since required that every student in every public school, including students in private schools that receive 60% of their funding from public sources, to learn about 4 areas: Maine tribal governments and political systems and their relationship with local, state, national, and international governments; Maine Native American cultural systems and the experiences of Maine tribal peoples throughout history; Maine Native American territories; and Maine Native American economic systems. Just over 20 years after the enactment of this law, 3 organizations, the ACLU of Maine, Wabanaki Alliance, and Abbey Museum, sought to evaluate the success and challenges and future of this piece of legislation. The purpose of this report is to celebrate the purpose of the Wabanaki Studies Law, to assess implementation of the law, and to urge leaders at all levels of our education system to do more to ensure the complete implementation of Wabanaki studies in Maine. To investigate the implementation of Wabanaki studies, we sent Freedom of Access Act requests to the Maine Department of Education and 10 school districts in Maine, seeking information about implementation of Wabanaki studies. These 10 school districts included 5 of the largest school districts in the state and 5 school districts neighboring Wabanaki communities. We also spoke with leaders in the area of Wabanaki studies who have been involved over the years in attempting to implement the Wabanaki Studies Law. Our overall conclusion is that this law has not been meaningfully and fully implemented in the state, and that there's a lot of room for growth. Our report is critical, but it's also constructive. It includes 8 recommendations, 4 for localities and 4 for statewide bodies. You'll hear more about these recommendations as this event unfolds. I will begin now by introducing the Honorable Donald Loring, who will deliver a keynote address. Her accomplishments are too long to list. Suffice it for our purposes to say that she's a tribal member of the Penobscot Nation and held the position of the nation's representative to the Maine state legislature for over a decade. She's currently the president and CEO of Seven Eagles Media Production Corporation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to giving a voice to Native people and providing an outlet for their creativity through video documentaries, performing arts, and multimedia. She also hosts a monthly community radio show, Wabanaki Windows, at Waru Blue Hill, Maine. And I will now hand it over to the Honorable Donald Loring. You're muted. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. As I was talking to myself there, this may not be a keynote, but I will provide some comments. So, and thank you for inviting me to speak. It is an honor, and I did get a chance to sort of review the report, but I will let this unfold as you all have planned this. What I want to talk about, it's been 21 years. That's a long time. And I want to just, your report covered a lot, the history of this event really well. I have to say, whoever did the research did a very good job. So thank you for that. I do want to say that I want to recognize somebody who helped me quite a great deal during that time in forming this legislation. And that was Deputy Commissioner of Education, Judy Lucarelli. And I met with her quite often to talk about what we needed to include in this act. And then what we thought might work. The other person who there are other people in here who you may be surprised about. Another person is former House Minority Leader William Schneider, was the Attorney General, was the Attorney General in the past. Bill Schneider went with me to Wisconsin to speak to their legislature about how well Maine did with a tribal rep in the legislative body. And during that trip, Bill and I had a lot of time to talk and just sort of, get together and know each other. He was a Republican. And in this law, he was instrumental in helping me to get a unanimous out of the Education Committee. The other person was Carol Weston, who was also a Republican. And she actually was sort of on the fence, but then came over. And so we were able to get a unanimous vote out of that Education Committee, which was very important. And we had testimony from all over. There were hundreds of people that testified that day. Mary Griffith, she was a teacher at Phillips Sugg Middle School in Lisbon Falls, and brought her 7th grade science class, who also testified during this time. So, it took a village. It really did. And we made this happen, and it was not easy. And I do want to say, what really surprised me was this editorial person. I think you'll recognize the name. He's passed now. Fred Nutter of Channel 6 out of Portland. He came on, I think it was the week before, with an editorial that was against the bill. And when he came out against the bill, I thought, we may not see this happen, but we did, and things worked out. Lots of stuff happened, and I do detail what happened in my book called "In the Shadow of the Eagle: A Tribal Representative in Maine." Had to get that in there. So let's move to present right now. In the past, I've always thought that pushing for legislative remedies for funding for this project and this act was not a wise idea. But I think, considering my research, what I've been doing in the past, year or so, I now feel that it is the right time to move forward to ask for funding for whatever this bill needs for enactment, so that the schools can really push this forward and make a difference here. I do want to also add one more thing. And I want to say that thanks to Representative Rena Newell, former representative, now chief of Sabayak, a bill was introduced in the state legislature that would establish a permanent Wabanaki seat on the Board of Trustees. So on June 10th, an act to establish a permanent appointment of the Wabanaki tribes to the Board of Trustees of the University of Maine system was signed into law by the governor. The Wabanaki chief supported my nomination, and the governor appointed me to that seat. So I want to say that I am now a member of the Board of Trustees, the University of Maine system. The diversity, equity, and inclusion are policies that are set throughout the university system mission statement. And it's my goal to make Wabanaki education and educational needs a priority during my tenure. One of those goals will be to advocate for the University of Maine system to recognize and implement existing Maine law. Maine Wabanaki studies, I'd like to see that as a requirement in teacher certification. And I intend to be a voice, sometimes a loud voice, to advocate for Wabanaki communities and Wabanaki scholars. And I will end by what I usually say, and that is communication and education equals understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna Loring. Communication and education equals understanding. That could very well have served as the title for the Wabanaki Studies report. Thank you for leaving us with those words. I will now introduce our panelists. We have 7 distinguished panelists from the 4 authoring organizations. I'll quickly run through their bios and then give the floor over to the organizations to describe how their missions are advanced by this report and to describe their personal reflections on some of the report's recommendations. Ambassador Molly and Dana is the Penobscot Nation Ambassador and Board President of the Wabanaki Alliance. She holds many other seats and is a longtime activist and advocate. Perhaps most importantly, she's a mother to 3 daughters, Carmela, Layla, and Iris. Newell Louie is a citizen of the Passamaquoddy tribe and current chairperson of the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission. He collaborates with other tribes and works within the Passamaquoddy tribe on language preservation and advancement. In 2018, Newell received a Master of Science in Linguistics from MIT with a focus on Indigenous languages. Born to and raised by Native-speaking parents, where he learned a lot of his language as a child, Newell has made it one of the focuses of his life to preserve and expand Indigenous language learning. James Eric Francis is director of the Penobscot Nation Cultural and Historic Preservation Department. He's a historian and visual artist. He holds a bachelor's and an intermediate MFA degree from the University of Maine. And following the recommendations of the Wabanaki Studies Commission in 2003, he worked to create a curriculum on Penobscot culture and history. Professor Margot Lukens is a member of the Board of Trustees at the Abbey Museum. She teaches at the University of Maine. Her teaching research interests include Wabanaki literary and storytelling history, Indigenous plays and playwrights, and literature of American colonization. Her work has included producing and directing plays by Indigenous playwrights on campus and in the region. She co-authored Still They Remember Me, Penobscot Transformer Tales, Volume 1, a bilingual book of traditional Penobscot stories with Carol Dana and Connor Quinn. Megan Sway is policy director at the ACLU of Maine, where she advocates for policies that advance the civil rights and civil liberties of everyone in the place we now call Maine. Rachel Bell is programs coordinator at the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission and has been working with the rest of the listed people on the publication of this report and helped us, I should mention, secure the cover art for this report. Without her input, this report would have a cover that looks a lot like its back. I will now ask a member of the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission to briefly describe the work of the Wabanaki Studies Commission and the recommendation of this report to reinstate that commission. And I will ask you to unmute Nu'ualu'i.
There we go.
Thank you.
Nu'ualu'i Lewis, Pescadumukad Naga, Walastagwawinil, Naguchi Auzibaik, Madakmaguk, Naganekutguk, Olispaswil. So good morning, everyone. My name is Nu'ualu'i, and I am a Passamaquoddy and Maliseet tribal citizen from Zibaik, Indian Township, Madakmaguk, and Upper New Brunswick, Maliseet in Tubic. And first off, I just want to start by saying thank you for everyone that helped put this comprehensive report together on the Wabanaki studies. It's just phenomenal, and I know a lot of work went into it. I did not participate in this, but fully support the report. And speaking as the chair of the Maine Indian State Commission, Tribal State Commission. I also want to thank those out there already working on curriculum development. There's a lot of work being done over the past few years. And I want to echo a little bit also of what Honorable Donna Loring had mentioned also. You know, we're in the 22nd year of this bill passing. And a couple of years ago, they wanted to have a 20-year celebration, and I was just, you know, a little bit dumbfounded as to why. And I think part of the problem is, you know, the lack of movement on this particular bill is the funding source, and Donna addressed that as well. You know, there's a lot of things that need to take place, and I'll get to that recommendation from the commission in a second or so. And I just want to let you know that, you know, growing up as a Passamaquoddy Maliseet citizen in a local community in Aroostook County, I underwent, you know, a lot of scrutiny, I guess, as being a native. And one thing I reflected upon when reading this report was some of the stories in the report are there as well. But one of the things I reflected upon was the lack of knowledge that my school system had. You know, we talked about a little bit about Plains Indians and Western tribes, you know, but no mention of our own tribes here in Maine. And I thought that had changed. You know, I tried to pay attention during the grammar school of my children. And then I had an opportunity in 2019 to teach a couple of classes at the University of Maine in Machias. And again, I taught Passamaquoddy culture, language, and history. And again, I was just like a little bit blown away with the lack of understanding and knowledge of freshmen in college coming in and not knowing about our own tribes here in Maine. And, you know, the lack of understanding with the national, you know, 560 some odd tribes in Maine, in the United States as well. So one thing I took from the report is the MITSIC took from the report was asked to speak upon was the reconstitution of the Wabanaki Studies Commission. And I have the whole thing in front of me, but I just want to highlight a couple of the items in there. You know, one of the most important things that the state of Maine can do is to reinstate the Wabanaki Studies Commission with appropriate staffing support and funding. And I just want to highlight that. You know, the commission was in place in 2002, 3, and 2004. But then it was disbanded at that point, right? And I think a reconstituted commission, appropriately funded for Wabanaki Studies Commission, could help guide oversight, make recommendations about curriculum and resources, and to help shape the recovery, help shape necessary teaching training. So I think the commission, the current, to be truly successful, right? The commission must be developed with the collaboration and expertise of Wabanaki people, who must in turn be compensated for their work. And these are direct quotes from the recommendation, which the recommendation states reconstitute the Wabanaki Studies Commission. And so, and then it says in the 19 years since the Wabanaki Commission was disbanded, there has been no formalized or compensated way for representatives from the Wabanaki tribes to provide impact, resources, and recommendations about implementation of the law. So I think that, if we can do this, the underlying recommendation is provide sufficient funding. The recommendation is provide sufficient funding to permit it to be conducted in, sufficient funding to permit it to conduct its critical mission, including funding to appropriately compensate experts. It also ought to be giving meaningful authority to aid in enforcement and implementation of the law. And like I said, a lot of us have been working over the past few years to come up with curriculum development. And I also know that since then, there also has been a state push for curriculum development at the state level as well. And I'm going to turn over to Rachel to see if she has any other comments from the MidSIC side. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Newell, and thank you to everyone. That's such an important topic to be discussing. MidSIC has been involved with promoting Wabanaki studies and the implementation of the law from the beginning, and we're still strongly committed to doing anything we can to support that effort. The Wabanaki Studies Commission did do an incredible amount of work, and there's so much to be gained from the re-implementation of that as a guiding force. And yeah, we believe that the creation of fundamental, mutually beneficial, and lasting change is best achieved when supported by education. And John Banks, who served on the commission for over 30 years, that was one of his party messages, was just stressing how critically important education is. So I'm honored to be part of this, and I know MidSIC is willing to partner and do anything we can to support this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel Bell. Thank you, Newell Louie. And now I'll ask Ambassador Dana if she has any reflections on some of the recommendations.
Thank you, Michael. I have all kinds. Good morning, everyone, and happy Indigenous Peoples Day. I want to thank, first and foremost, my great aunt, Donna Loring, whose wisdom and leadership and advocacy is, holding so strong all these years later. And we're just so fortunate to have her here with us today to be able to really center us in this conversation. So thank you. I also want to thank the Wabanaki Alliance, the ACLU, the Abbey Museum, and MITSIC for coming together to do something really historic. I know that word is overused, but we are looking historically at a very historic thing. So I'll throw it in there one more time. And I think that this report is a great reflection of the shortcomings of this law, but also the real brilliance of this law. And, without it, we wouldn't be able to reflect on these shortcomings and recommend how to best move forward. So I think there's a lot of really great information in this report. And I really love how the recommendations sum it up in a real factual way. This is what's happened. This is where we're at right now. And this is how we move forward together. And I also want to thank the schools that responded to our requests and gave honest information about how they are trying to implement this law, not trying in other cases, and really pointing out honestly some of the areas where they need help. And my mother has been an educator for decades and decades now, and I've seen the toll that teaching can take on a human being, and it's really a profession that we don't support as well as we should. So I really would love to see people gather around educators and support them as we move forward. And the good news is we have a lot of ways to do that. And so my recommendations that we're looking at, one is the Department of Education should update the main learning results with specific outcomes for Wabanaki studies. And I want to highlight a couple ways I think we're moving in the right direction on that. And of course, the report has a wealth of, information about this recommendation, but I want to highlight a recent development. The Maine Department of Education has brought on a Penobscot teacher, educator, Brianne Lowler, who is working to assemble a commission of folks to compensate them for their time, Indigenous folks. I think that's something we can't stress enough. We're often asked to do a lot of labor, and it's offered to us like, a favor, will you come in and speak to my class? And the reward is, networking and attention, and people will know you and see you, and you'll help these kids. And that's all great. But I feel like you only treat marginalized people that way. Like we're giving you this gift of coming to share with us and expend your time. So I think the compensation piece is really important. We need to really honor the knowledge of Indigenous knowledge keepers. So I'm excited about the work that Brianne is starting, and it's just getting underway. She'll be looking to set up some modules about Wabanaki studies, and this curriculum will be directly informed by Indigenous people and educators. And I think a lot of the folks on this Zoom may be involved, and I think that that's really exciting work. So I'm excited to see how that unfolds. Another effort I want to highlight is the Portland Public School System and their curriculum that they are developing, and they're taking it very slow. And I think that's deliberate. And I think that they're doing it in exactly the appropriate way. They have involved many knowledge keepers and Indigenous people. And the real credit goes to probably a couple people, but the first would be Bridget Neptune, who is a Passamaquoddy citizen. She's a mother who had children in the Portland public school system and noticed that the education around Wabanaki studies was really lacking, or maybe not even there at all. So she started working with a teacher, Fiona Hopper, in that school system. And the two of them together amassed a big coalition of support around really getting this curriculum put into place. So they were thankfully very supported by the superintendent, and were able to put forth the beginnings of a really great curriculum that I know a lot of you on here have had a look at and been involved in the planning meetings. So I want to highlight that work. And I think that, when I talk about Wabanaki studies, I often highlight we have a past problem. You know, in a lot of this curriculum, as detailed in the report, Indigenous people and Wabanaki people are seen as something in the past. You know, just this morning I was watching the news and they had a great little segment on Indigenous Peoples Day. And then they talked about a group that was doing farming practices. And they highlighted these practices as, you know, people of the past were doing these. And they were talking about Indigenous people. And we're very much still here. And I'm sure that Indigenous people are still doing those farming practices. So I think something that this report and the original Wabanaki Studies Commission did great was highlighting the areas of land, territory, economy, history, culture, and government, because I think those things will span ancestral times all the way up till now. So something that Portland is doing well, Portland Public Schools, is working Wabanaki studies into all of their curriculum, because it isn't just a history thing, it isn't just a civics thing, it's a living, breathing thing, as are we. The next recommendation I wanted to touch on, school districts must be held accountable through a review of comprehensive education plans. And I think that, you know, should we be able to implement the recommendations of this report and some of the important things we've already touched on today, Donna talking about getting this properly funded, Mitzik talking about reinstating the commission, I believe that those two things will really go a long way into seeing success on both of the recommendations I've talked about, but definitely this one. And I think that the term held accountable can be scary and threatening at times, but I want to stress that this report wasn't done to be a gotcha. You know, it wasn't done to blame anyone or make anyone defensive. This report is a snapshot in time of the Wabanaki Studies law that is so very important. And some things are so crucial that we need to face the truth of things together. And truth isn't good or bad, it just is. So that's a great starting place for doing this work from now forward. And to wrap up, I feel like this is important for us to do on Indigenous Peoples Day, because as somebody who has traveled the state talking about stereotypes and harmful representation and appropriation of our culture, and, you know, not wanting to celebrate genocide of our people like Columbus Day would lead us to do, you know, you wouldn't believe how many times I went into rooms and people didn't even know there were tribes in Maine. And this isn't in the, you know, distant past. This is fairly recent. So this law, I spoke about the brilliance of it because it puts Wabanaki studies into the things that everybody is already learning. And there's a quote that I love, and it's hard to hate up close. So when kids in our schools in Maine understand that their neighbors and their friends and, you know, people that they're going to play in sports and see in other schools are Indigenous people, are Wabanaki here today, with those ties to our past and those contributions our ancestors made and our people are still making, that's really empowering, not just for Wabanaki kids, but for all kids. And that is really going to help our state come to terms with a lot of the disparities and then inequities. And I think what people really need to understand is that when you're most vulnerable or most oppressed people do well, it lifts up everyone in our state. So I'll wrap up there. I want to just express my sincere gratitude to everyone involved, and thank you for running this Zoom for us all today. And thank you to everyone who's watching. And I really have high hopes for this report. I think it's a great turning point in this journey of the Wabanaki Studies Law.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Dana, for those wise and very thought-provoking words. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Megan Sway from the ACLU, to share her reflections about some of the recommendations.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all so much for being here. It's an honor to join you and talk about this really visionary law that Representative Loring both wrote and sponsored. I wanted to touch a bit, following up on Ambassador Dana's comments about accountability. I wanted to focus on the ways in which, both from a top-down and bottom-up approach, we can ensure accountability, but also support for this law. I think so many of our teachers these days are feeling just completely burned out, overwhelmed. They don't have time to do what they need to do. And that is where they need support from both the top at the state and from the bottom from our communities. And so those are the two places I want to focus on. I think the state of Maine, through the Department of Education, is really in the best position to help support schools and teachers in implementation of this law. This is through providing sample curriculum, training, resources. The state is really the central place with the most resources and the most reach to be able to help people. And in our review, we found that the Department of Education is doing a lot of good. You know, they have hired a Wabanaki person to help. They are working on a Moose module. I want to acknowledge those efforts. We saw emails where they advertised trainings to teachers, not advertised, but they publicized trainings to teachers that teachers can take about Wabanaki studies. And they have a website where they provide resources. I think what is needed in this moment is a step further. It's a comprehensive look at this, a comprehensive attempt to provide resources. What do I mean by that? I think training should be regular, and they should perhaps be mandated, but if not mandated, there should be a schedule and a yearly update so that teachers know that they have the tools they need and the training they need to enforce this law. Additionally, the website has great promise. You know, it suggests that it is built so that there will be curriculum available for every grade from kindergarten through 12 as required by the law. But when you click through, there are only resources, and some of these links are out of date, and it's just an incomplete website. And what is really needed for teachers who are so overloaded, as I said, is curriculum, lesson plans, ways to replicate lessons so that teachers can take this information and run with it and not have to spend as much time on their own sort of clicking through resources to create their own lesson plans. Now, of course, teachers will use resources to deepen their knowledge and to ensure that they have a broader base to be able to teach these laws, but they really do need lesson plans, curriculum to be able to do that. I also want to talk about how communities can support. Some of this is at the school level. School districts, as Ambassador Dana said, should make sure that Wabanaki studies are integrated into their education plans. School boards should review those plans and make sure that implementation is done right. And school boards should provide the resources to schools to be able to do this. So much of this is not asking people to do more with less, but to say this is such a visionary law. It's so important to change the way we do education that we really need resources to make that happen. And without the resources, we're going to continue to see the sort of good attempts, but incomplete attempts at implementing this law. People in communities should ensure that their school board members know that it is important to them that this law be resourced, that Wabanaki people be compensated for helping teachers come up with the right curriculum, and that it is important to put in the budget to fund what is necessary to make this a reality. Now, in doing this, I just want to quickly caution, as someone who's not Indigenous myself, and the ACLU was part of this report, you know, if we had just gone out and written this report without any feedback, it would have suffered from a lot of the pitfalls that we see from some of the lesson plans around the state, where well-intentioned people do not partner with Wabanaki and come up with lesson plans that reinforce stereotypes that are incomplete. And so in calling on community members to demand more of school boards, it's so important to partner with Wabanaki and to follow the lead of Wabanaki people so that we are implementing the law right and not replicating mistakes that have already happened. So my basic point is that this law, in order to be fully implemented, in order to be fully successful, needs support and enforcement from the top and the bottom. And the state and communities need to work so that we can fully resource and fully implement the law.
Thank you, Megan Sway. I will now ask Margot Lukens from the Abbey Museum to share her reflections on the report.
Thank you, Michael. I also want to thank Donna Loring and her colleague in the legislature back in 2001, Donald Soktoma, for their leadership over decades on this really important effort in the state. I just want to say a few things about the recommendation that the Department of Ed should work with a newly constituted Wabanaki Studies Commission to create model curriculum. I know that my colleague James Francis is going to have more to say about this very recommendation, and then I'll come back to talk about the last recommendation. But what I want to say now is that this report really does reflect the needs of students in the state. And I just want to highlight some of the ways that the report figures this forth by quoting people who have been in the classroom and get the reaction of students. For instance, Nolan Altivator, who is a student teacher and a Passamaquoddy citizen, and now works as a curator of education at the Abbey Museum. He's encountered something that I've also seen in the classroom, which is the frustration expressed by non-native high school students after learning about the rich Wabanaki history in this region that they had never previously been taught. These students were frustrated by the incomplete version of state and national history that omitted meaningful reference to Wabanaki perspectives. And so this is an issue for every learner in Maine. It's not just people who haven't learned about it yet. It's not just for Wabanaki people. It's really for creating a full sense of who the people of this region are and how we are related in our intertwined histories. So I want to turn it over to my colleague, James Francis, to say more about the curriculum development.
Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Mullion, Megan, all those who spoke before me. As I'm actually in Skowhegan right now on my way to work with former Chief Barry Dana on a cultural project, and sitting underneath the statue of, or the sculpture of an Indian here in Skowhegan. But I just wanted to talk briefly about, my role, as a undergrad. This law was passed, and I actually worked for the Wabanaki Studies Commission and helped craft the final report. And so was intimately knowledgeable about what the Wabanaki Studies Commission really wanted out of this law, and understood the problems of funding, and understood that there was an issue with the Studies Commission not having a fiscal leg. And so when I left working for the Wabanaki Studies Commission, once they disbanded, I went to work for the Penobscot Nation, my tribe, and submitted a proposal to have a tribal historian. And the role as tribal historian was twofold. It really was about collecting histories and doing that kind of history type of legwork, but also it was about cultural education. Half of my job is about educating others about who we as Penobscot people are. And that was very important because it was, excuse me, it was on the heels of this law. And so we immediately got to work as soon as I became the tribal historian, to seek some funding to have some curriculum development. And in, I believe it was 2006 and 2008, we had back-to-back grants from the Administration for Native Americans to develop curriculum. And we partnered with local schools at Old Town on the first grant in Indian Island School. And then on the second grant, we increased our geographic range to include schools from all over the state, and also to get out of that fourth and fifth grade window that the first grant kind of focused on, the main studies kind of place where this law tended to land. So, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, all these recommendations are coming out today. All these recommendations are already in the original report. And I think what's really important, and I think that, you know, Donna hit the nail on the head, that this is really in need of funding, you know, because it took hundreds of thousands of dollars and a lot of time for the Penobscots to develop our curriculum that we offered, and the expertise of teachers to work with culturally knowledgeable people. And so I think the piece that's been missing, because the recommendations have always been there, recommendations for MITSIC, for the Department of Ed, for the University of Maine School of Ed, you know, the tribes. And so looking back on those recommendations and the recommendations here, I think the key is the funding. And, you know, as former chair of, co-chair, me and Margot, of the Board of Trustees at the Abbey Museum, I think the Abbey's role is really important, because as we're going through a decolonizing of that museum, one component of that museum is the tribally appointed, the Abbey Council. 2 people from each tribe were appointed to serve at the Abbey for their tribal groups. And I think they have a pivotal role, you know, not only to educate visitors to the Abbey, but to help, you know, mold curriculum and to, you know, disseminate that to schools, whether it's through schools that come to them or by providing information as we move forward. Because ultimately, like the Abbey Museum, this Maine Department of Ed also needs some little bit of decolonizing as we move forward. So one last thing, you know, as we continue our efforts for educational outreach at the Penobscot Nation, we've been working extremely close with Portland schools. And one unique product that we've been providing to them is an immersive education program attached to our cultural tourism, where Portland teachers, after school is done, come to Sugar Island on the Penobscot River and spend a few days learning from educators, camping out, you know, learning about our culture. And they've been doing that for about 3 years with us. And this last year, we actually had the Teachers of the Year group come and visit us for 3 days on Sugar Island. A really positive group of comments that came out in the Portland Press Herald about those trips. But I think these types of initiatives really could go a long way. And you know, I think that curriculum development properly funded is vital for this. And it's really up to the Department of Ed to step up and take responsibility for the state mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Margot, back to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yes. I just wanted to follow up with the final recommendation of the report, which is that Wabanaki studies must be required as part of teacher certification and continuing teacher education. James alluded to this, and other speakers today have alluded to this. And I just wanted to highlight a few things that have begun to happen at the University of Maine, and to urge continuing development in that direction. Much of the development has been due to the energies of Wabanaki people who work at the university. I want to say that that's the source of the energy, and non-native faculty and administrators are beginning to join. But things like the memorandum of understanding between the university and the Penobscot Nation about collections held being property of the tribe and co-curated with the university. I understand a similar MOU is being developed with the Passamaquoddy tribe. Bilingual signage on campus, the ubiquitous land acknowledgement. But these developments are being followed by work on piloting a course in Wabanaki Studies in the College of Education and Human Development. And I want to give some credit to Dean Penny Bishop, who in the last year and a half since she's been at the university has been welcoming of these efforts, again, led mostly by Wabanaki people at the university. But it is true that I'm an English teacher. I don't teach in the College of Ed, but I get undergraduate students and graduate students coming to my courses in Wabanaki and other Native American literatures, really hungry for this material and eager to begin developing curriculum for their own use in their classrooms, in their future or current classrooms. The need is there, the desire is there. Indeed, social studies standards have been recently redeveloped at the DOE level. And I just want to tell an anecdote, which is that in one of my graduate English courses, I had a teacher already, had his own 9th grade classrooms in the state. And his response to a final project assignment was to create a whole unit applying English language arts standards to teach some traditional Penobscot stories and contemporary Wabanaki poetry in a 3-week unit. And so I know that there are, lots of ways that we haven't yet, begun to steer students at the university level, and that this is part of our responsibility. It was articulated in the report by the Wabanaki Studies Commission in 2003, and the responsibility remains with the University of Maine system and any other institutions that train teachers to serve in the state of Maine. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Margot and James from the Abbey Museum. If none of the organizations have more to say about the recommendations, I have a couple of questions to start off a discussion. So I'll wait for a second to see if any hands go up to add to the comments that you've already made. All right, seeing none. The battle for the recognition of Wabanaki sovereignty is strong and getting stronger by the year in Maine. There are some claims in this report about there being a relationship between Wabanaki studies and Wabanaki sovereignty. I want to get our discussion started by asking people for their reflections about the relationship between Wabanaki studies and Wabanaki sovereignty. And if you have reflections on Wabanaki sovereignty separately, I welcome you to share those as well. Please go ahead, James Francis.
Well, I think if there's Wabanaki education, Wabanaki sovereignty would be a no-brainer.
Succinct, Ambassador Dana.
I had a big long thing I was going to say, but I don't know if I can top that. That really is the bottom line. And I would highlight the work of Donna Loring again as one of the co-authors of a document called One Nation Under Fraud, a Remonstrance. And in my role as co-chair of the Permanent Commission on the Status of Indigenous, Racial, and Tribal Populations, we were able to publish this report together. And if you look into this, you'll see that the state of Maine has been exerting this power and control over the Wabanaki tribes for way longer back than the land claims in 1980, and even further back than the Non-Intercourse Act and all of the roots of that land claim settlement. And this isolation and control and treating the tribes in Maine different from other tribes in the country has really, really deep roots. And once you understand those roots, you can wrap your mind around our current struggles, and you can see that our seeking to be treated equally isn't based in a power grab. It isn't based in revenge, and it isn't something to be feared. It's based on undoing a lot of this wrongness of history. So once you understand that, nobody would read about kind of other quote unquote tragic things or unfair things in the world objectively and blame the people now for seeking truth and healing and change. But for some reason that happens with Indigenous people, because so much of our history has been made invisible and has been silenced and has been kind of locked away in dark rooms. So when we teach citizens of Maine this real history, it makes our work and policy so much easier, because they're getting all the facts they need to be informed. And we get caught up in this Democrat, Republican, left and right struggle over things like tribal rights, when really it's about human rights. And when you learn about just how grossly those rights have been trampled on throughout the generations, it paints a much clearer picture of the work we're trying to do today. So our work at the Wabanaki Alliance is all around policy and advocating for this legislation. And as most everyone knows that's probably listening, we got across the finish line with some aspects of this tribal state relationship, and we really didn't with sort of the big meaningful sovereignty, the restoration of the recognition of our inherent sovereignty. We have not crossed the finish line with that yet, because we do need to address that power and control that the state of Maine continues to exert over the Wabanaki people. So this report is totally a step in the right direction. And I guess I said a lot more words, but James really hit the nail on the head. And it's completely directly linked. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just jump in here?
Please do,
Sure.
Honorable Moore.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely, James, you're good. The other thing I'd like to point out is that, sovereignty is a huge issue, not just in Maine, but it's national. So number one, I have a radio show. It's called Wabanaki Windows. And I have a 2-part series on sovereignty. And the first part has 12 shows in it, 1 hour shows. Second part, we're on our 5th show, and I think we're going to wind up on the subject next month. The other thing I want to tell you is that the One Nation Under Fraud, a remonstrance, my yearly lecture series at UNE will be totally on that. And the co-authors will be with me, and we will be explaining a main thread through that, and be very interesting for you all and everybody listening to tune into that lecture. And that's going to be a UNE Donna M. Loring lecture series, the 12th, October 12th at noontime, tomorrow at noon.
Thank you. And just to repeat to all listeners, Representative Loring has shared that this report, One Nation Under Fraud, a remonstrance, will be the topic of an event at the University of New England on October 12th, this week. Yes, Nua Louis, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you to James and Mullion and the rest of you as well, Donna, Rachel, Megan, Margot, that it's not about blame and shame, right? It's needing to know the history of where we are, as people. And I don't mean we as in Passamaquoddy or Penobscot or Micmac, Maliseet, Wabanaki. I mean that that, you know, all of us need to understand where each of us are coming from, right? So that we can be better people, better citizens of the state, if you will, of the nation, if you will, United States, but also of our nation as well. And one of the things that Mitzik did at the last meeting was agreed, kind of informally, to stop using the word member when referring to Passamaquoddy member. I'm a member of the Passamaquoddy. I'm a member of whatever. You know, YMCA has members. The Passamaquoddy has citizens. The Penobscot Nation has citizens. And I'm shying away from the other word as well, the T word. And, you know, we mentioned Penobscot Nation, right? And I'd like to see a move for Passamaquoddy Nation as well, Maliseet Nation, Mi'kmaq Nation. Because, you know, when you use those other terms, that they diminish who we are, right? And part of us is reconstituting our own identity, right? Or not reconstituting, but highlighting our identity, because we're not members. You know, like I said, the YMCA has members. We are citizens. And, you know, and if we were put on equal terms with other nations, you know, the sovereignty would come into line, you know, and I think part of that is the education of everyone involved, right? And if we can come to an understanding of who we are and where we've come from, right, that we may be more compassionate to our fellow citizens from wherever they come from. Thank you.
Thank you, Newell. Representative Loring has just informed us that the event is on Wednesday the 12th, not tomorrow. And if you go to the University of New England's website, you'll be able to both download the report, One Nation Under Fraud, and register for the event. I urge everyone here to go and to listen to Donald Loring's radio show as well. So a large proportion of the focus of this report is the impact on the majority population, the settler population, the non-native population of Wabanaki studies. We've just heard it'll make the majority compassionate. It'll make the recognition of inherent Wabanaki sovereignty a no-brainer. I want to ask for people's reflections about the other side of the coin, the impact on Wabanaki and other native students in Maine. Because as someone who belongs to a minority population myself, and as an attorney who's read many cases about the value of true and just education, you know, the focus should not just be on the majority population, but on the marginalized students in the classroom. And I'd just like to invite people to reflect both on their personal experiences and what they think the impact would be on Native students, on Wabanaki students of fully implemented Wabanaki studies.
Well, I was waiting for a teacher to respond, but well, over the years since the law came into effect, and because my radio show has been on for years, and that was one of the questions on one of my shows, and I believe we had Professor forget her name now, Maureen Smith, talk about the effect that well, look at mascots and that sort of thing, but that has on children. And then if you counterbalance that with the education on the contributions of Maine tribes, Maine tribal people, and their worth and what and things that they've done, and the fact that, you know, we we are just like everybody else. We've got a great Maine author, I have to say, Morgan Talty, who's really made the New York Times, and I think it contributes to the self-respect and self-worth of students to be recognized that, hey, we have a history, and we're just as good as anybody else, and and that will be a tool in getting rid of this legacy of shame that we've been under.
I'll chime in again, just because I appreciate what Donna said, and I just wanted to say that she cued me in with mascots, and I know Mullion has done a tremendous amount of work, trying to dispel that here in Maine, or get rid of it, right? And MIXIC participated as well many years ago, with a few of the schools that were still holdouts, if you will. And I can tell you one of the most impactful ones that I went to, I think, was Sanford. When I walked into the school to talk about mascots with some others, from around the state as well, was we walked in onto a rug where you wipe your feet, and it was the outline of a native head. So you walked in, and that's what you walked across. That's where you cleaned off your boots, etc. And it just was like, the unknowing for some individuals, and I won't say the I word either, but the not uneducated, not having the knowledge to understand, what you're doing, or the is just, we have to overcome that. And I think if we can talk about issues in the school system, and we have to start somewhere. This law is restarting, but we all have to start somewhere. MIXIC started with removing the word member. It's starting with little things, right? But we got to get to the where we need to be in terms of like equal footing, and we perpetuate this stereotype every Sunday in the fall and spring with these mascots at the National Football League, right? That they have, people go to the stadium dressed in native regalia, if you will, costume. And, part of one of my classes, I taught a little bit about that in terms of like, it's like we're an invisible people, where it doesn't matter if you do that, right? Where if you had somebody with, and I use in an educational process, I used a blackface as well, because people did that with Halloween. And if they did that, they're chastised, and they should be and they very well should be. But if you go as a native, people don't seem to get it, right? So the education is so important to understand, that we are all of us on this planet are equal women.
Thank you, Noah Louie, and Margot Lukens, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the effect of seeing yourself, representation in the classroom, whether it's reading works by people from your nation, or having serious conversation about real events in history in which your people particularly played active roles and are not represented as simply being shoved around by a mainstream colonizing force. So, I think, I've been seeing this in my classrooms and in work that I've done also in theater. I just want to tell two stories. One was back in 2003, I think it was, really the first big effort by a group of Wabanaki people doing a piece of community theater, performed a play by native playwright from Canada, Thompson Highway, called The Rez Sisters. And the performance of that staged reading at the auditorium at University of Maine drew a very large audience of, I would say, 80% Wabanaki people. And the feeling of that night back in 2003 was so exciting and effervescent. And people laughed at jokes that the cast had even forgotten were funny, because they were seeing, true exchanges and true scenarios of themselves. And the other anecdote is also a theater anecdote. It's about bringing Penobscot stories to the stage. More recently, in 2016, the Transformer Tales play that we did with the Penobscot Theater. And I think it became something that people in Penobscot Nation were proud of, not only seeing their stories enacted, but hearing their language spoken as part of the show. And I know Ambassador Dana's elder daughter was part of that show, and she certainly was articulate about her experience and what it meant. And Donna Loring interviewed her with us on a WERU show after the performances. So the importance of representation, it validates, it shows the rest of the class that you are, and it's extremely important for all students. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those reflections, Margot. So someone has posed a question on YouTube, which I'll ask after seeing what Ambassador Dana was about to say.
If this is Iris, and if Iris will let me, I'll weigh in on that last question. Say hi. So growing up, I went to the school on the reservation on Indian Island, and we learned about our history and our people in the reservation school. And, we certainly knew about the Scout Proclamation and the bounties on our ancestors' heads. And this was kind of common knowledge for us. So going into high school, I went to John Baptist High School in Bangor, and seeing that my peers didn't have this knowledge, barely knew who I was or where I came from, and treated me accordingly. When I had an issue I wanted to raise about mascots or why we're celebrating Columbus Day, I was treated very poorly by my peers and sometimes by my teachers. So my eldest daughter, Carmela, who was in the Transformer Tales, and my younger daughter, my middle daughter now, Layla, was in that play too. They had a really great time and were very empowered by that project. My oldest daughter goes to the same high school I went to now, and seeing the change in these past 20 years or so of my experience versus hers is really encouraging. She won't have to go to schools and see, Indian mascots at basketball games. She won't have to get a day off from school for Columbus Day. And these things I want to touch briefly on. Some people call these changes just symbolic or just, low-hanging fruit or just things. But they matter, and it really is all connected. And if you don't view people as people, you're not going to treat them very well. And when we talk about these larger reforms on tribal sovereignty and the land claims and all that, I really believe that some of these bills that came before, these larger efforts, really set the table for having a more equitable discussion. So I'm really, thinking about education and representation. It's great to see Indigenous people in media and entertainment and government. And it feels like truly a new dawn for a lot of this. So, this is my youngest, Iris, who was born May 31st, thinking about the world when she is in high school 16 years from now, and how that'll look different even for my first child is really something to be hopeful about.
Thank you, Ambassador Dana, and a warm welcome to our extremely cute panelist, Iris. Fortunately, this will be recorded and available on, I think, all of the organization's websites. So you can keep looking at Iris and feeling warm and tingly in your heart. Language has come up a lot in people's remarks about the meaning of Wabanaki studies, language and recognition. I'll note quickly that I was in Washington, D.C. earlier this year, and I walked into the National Museum and found this. This is a map to the National Gallery of Art. And the text is in Amharic, which is my native language, the Ethiopian national language. Now, there are lots of Ethiopian immigrants in Washington, D.C., and that's why the museum decided to do this. And Ethiopians are immigrants to the United States, and so part of the larger settler colonial population. But just seeing that created an unbelievable level of belonging and recognition. And it's quite shocking how powerful just the simple act of recognition can be. And so I just mentioned that anecdote to underscore what Ambassador Dana just said around how meaningful it is to be seen and to be recognized and to be part of the official record. So someone from YouTube has asked the following: as someone who would like to support our local school on this effort, is there a list or a link to Wabanaki individuals to contact to help our school with this? Would any of the panelists like to respond to this one? Well, my recommendation to that inquirer is to start by reaching out to the Department of Education. As you've heard earlier in this panel, the Department of Education has made great strides even since this report started to get authored. So just in the last year and a half, has made great strides in making resources available so that school districts have support and have guidance about what to do. The final question that I'll ask the panel, and I see Representative Loring, you just unmuted, so I'll pause and let you go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just mention the Commissioner Pendermaken, and she's been a fantastic ally for our educational efforts. And I just have to say thank you to her and for allowing and for helping us to get a website and a group going to look at the educational issues and stuff. She's been really cooperative, and I do owe her a big thank you. So thank you, Pender, if you're listening.
Thank you, Representative Loring. And the Department of Education has also been very cooperative in our Freedom of Access Act public records requests. And so I think we owe them a thanks as well. The one final question I'll ask people is what they think the role of language is in Wabanaki studies. And I'm looking at Nu'ualui in particular, but of course, others are welcome to respond as well.
Yeah, Walu and Michael. Yeah, it's, I teach a class a couple times a week in language. And I also, want to thank the University of Maine also, because they allowed me to invent or develop a class, I guess, in Passamaquoddy language, culture, and history at the University of Maine in Machias. And I did that for a couple of semesters. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to continue that, but would like to get back to it. And I think part of that is, that it was well received. You don't learn to be fluent in a semester. You don't learn to be fluent in 2 semesters. And what I tell a lot of my class now is it took us, a number of years to get where we are. You know, we're 400, 500 years in, and our culture and language has been decimated. So we have to turn this around, just like, you know, this LD 291, right? It was developed in 2001, but we're kind of reconstituting it now. And we have to start there. We have to start with the changing the way we use verbiage and language in all of documents that we present, but also, you know, just changing the culture a little bit. And so to reclaim our language and our culture is going to take more than a year, more than a generation. And hopefully it doesn't take 500 years. And, you know, part of that could be that we understand, you know, that we don't put that stigma on our students, on our children, on our grandchildren, that we allow them to develop their own language, right? Whatever that might be. And then to also reinforce it in the academic settings as well. Only one.
Thank you, Newell. Any comments from others? Yes, Margot, please go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Newell's remarks. I think the question of language studies and who does it support has been something the University of Maine, we've had discussions about that for the last 30 years. And when we first constituted a Native Studies program, there was a lot of controversy about whether Wabanaki language should be taught and, you know, sort of put out there, you know, to create speakers beyond members of the nations. And so one of the things that happened more recently, my work with Carol Dana on the play, Penobscot Transformer Tales, led to her sense that the stories that those Transformer Tales came from needed to be republished for a central core audience of Penobscot young people growing up speaking English. The stories had been published back in early 20th century with a kind of seat of the pants ethnographer transliteration of Penobscot and then English translations. And the storyteller really was backgrounded. And so in creating this book, Still They Remember Me, Carol's purpose was to foreground the storyteller and to bring his words of the stories into contemporary Penobscot orthography, a spelling system adopted officially by the tribe in the 1980s, and to make translations that would make English translations that would reinforce a learner's understanding of the shape of Penobscot, of the intentions of Penobscot language. And so starting with the central audience of young Penobscot people wanting to come back to their language through stories they may already know. They're very, commonly known stories. Then, creates the possibility of other audiences around that central core. And so, what Carol says is that story is the basket in which language is carried. And it also, what we discovered as we worked on these stories was how much the stories taught about what it means to be a good citizen and member of the community, and how you live well on the land here. And also the stories teach to Penobscot people a long family relationship with the Penobscot River and the creatures in it. So the language is a really important vessel and aspect of teaching. And it's another way, I think, building on what Newell and Ambassador Dana have both said, that shows the persistence and long tradition held by Wabanaki communities, that these stories have really reached back into a time long before colonization, and the language has carried them to us.
Thank you for those reflections, Margot. So I see we have 5 minutes left in the time that we promised to spend on this panel. I'll invite any panelists to share any concluding remarks before we sign off for the day. And while you think of anything you might want to say, I'll share another YouTube question. Someone asked whether the report has any specifics about teacher education for Wabanaki studies. Does anyone want to answer that? I would be happy to. Yes, go ahead, Megan.
The report does recommend that there be required pre-certification teaching for teachers. So because Wabanaki studies is a required subject under the education laws, that people before they become teachers should have a pre-certification in this. And that is one recommendation. And then there is a recommendation for required continuing education after people become teachers, to ensure that we are always learning, we're always keeping fresh and expanding our knowledge base.
I have go ahead, Mark. You have more on that question, because I was going to give my closing thought.
All right, I just wanted to say that, certainly the requirement needs to be there for teachers in order to allow them to teach confidently and appropriately at the same time. And that's one of the things that I encounter as a college level instructor, is that people are coming to me whether they're already in the workforce or about to go out in the workforce with a lot of needs in that regard. All right, I had something else, but I've forgotten it, so I'll yield to Molly.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Ambassador Dana.
Sure. I just had a closing thought and a call to action for folks who are joining us today. So we've talked a lot about tribal sovereignty and some of the policy initiatives that we've worked on. We have a bill at the federal level right now. It's HR 6707, sponsored by Congressman Jared Golden. And this bill looks to address some of the historical inequity by applying federal Indian law from now going forward to tribes in Maine. Right now, currently, because of the Settlement Act of 1980, all of those federal laws meant to benefit tribes they're not applicable to the nations in Maine. So we have attached this to a couple different vehicles. We are looking for a champion in the
Oops. Ambassador Dana, I think you cut off at champion. It looks like Ambassador Dana's internet connection is failing us. Probably the enemies of HR 6707 are sabotaging this event as we speak.
Oh, wait, there she is.
Okay. Yes, we lost you at champions.
Okay, great. So we are looking for, I'm going to turn off my video just to make sure you hear me. We are looking for a champion in the Senate. So something you all can do is to look at WabanakiAlliance.com and contact Angus King. Senator King has a committee of jurisdiction that will likely be looking at this bill. He is currently opposed to it, and we would like to get him to come around to not oppose this bill. So please stress to Senator King that he represents all citizens of Maine, and that this law would be a great thing for the tribes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Dana. Noah Louis.
Yes, so I just want to say thank you all, Michael, everyone here on the Zoom, and also all those that are out there listening, for listening and paying attention to this very important issue that we were discussing here today, or highlighting today. and like I said, hopefully we can move forward, right? We always have to move forward and start somewhere. So make a difference.
Thank you very much, Noah Louie. Thank you to all the panelists here. MITSIC, Wabanaki Alliance, the Abbey Museum, and the ACLU are always looking for supporters and followers. Please support all of these organizations. Please listen to Representative Loring's radio program, and please, once you're done reading this report, read One Nation Under Fraud. And please tune into the University of New England address that Representative Loring will be giving on Wednesday. I think we have run out of time. There are many people who made this report possible. They're almost all mentioned in the acknowledgement section. I'm sure some people were forgotten. There's some beautiful art produced by very young Wabanaki people all throughout the report. And so if you run out of steam reading the report, then flip through the rest of its pages and enjoy the art at the very least. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day to everyone. Thank you again to all the panelists here and to the Honorable Donna Loring for making this event possible.